Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is MIKKEL Thorpe, and this is the Expat Money Show. Today's guest has been living and working in Asia since 2006. He has written for Lonely Planet, published his own travel guides, and built multiple online brands that reach tens of millions of people each year. He currently lives with his wife and two boys in Thailand, and he is an expert on online security and identity protection and is the host of the All Things Secured YouTube channel. Please welcome to the show, Josh Summers. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing well, MIKKEL. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here. I think that your topic and what you discuss on your program is so timely and so important. So I guess before we jump into everything, maybe give us a little bit of a background on how you got interested in this and how you started your work.
Well, yeah, when I was in university, I spent a year studying abroad in Central America and really fell in love with kind of just being overseas in a different culture. And so when my wife and I got married in 2005, one of the first things we did is we moved out to China. We were in Western China. I don't know where your family, I know you got a wife that's from China. I don't know if they're kind of Eastern side. That's usually where they're from.
Close to Chengdu, close in Sichuan area, kind of around there.
That is some good food. At least you got some good food going for you there.
Spicy.
Yes, definitely spicy. So I was in the far west. So think north of Tibet. We bordered Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. And the benefits of that were that we got a lot of great cultural mix. It wasn't just ethnic Chinese. It was also ethnic Uyghur, ethnic Kazakh, a lot of Central Asian influence that brought just a lot of unique parts of living there, including not just cuisine, but also customs, all of that kind of stuff. But it also brought a lot of ethnic conflict in that part of the world. And that's what really sped along a lot of surveillance in that part of China. And not to say that I was truly excited about that, but I did learn a lot from that experience. Like when you find yourself in a place where, cameras, I would get off the bus and between the bus stop and my house, there were like 8 cameras that were doing facial recognition as I was walking to my house. So you learn how to live, how to live with that, but also, what privacy protections you are most important, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of our privacy that's already exposed, whether we like it or not, just being on Facebook or being on the internet. But knowing what you have control over and how you want to control that, that's what is really important. And that's what I took away from spending time in China.
So it's interesting that you do mention this, because as a content creator, how do you kind of bridge the gap between your own personal privacy, but still being out there and building a business? I know this is something that I struggle with a lot.
Oh, I can only imagine. I heard in your last episode, even just talking about how I'm not going to say exactly where I have my investments or exactly where I've bought property. And I totally get that, right? Because there's part of it where you want to be like the internet rewards transparency, or YouTube and an audience rewards just feeling like they connect with you. And I do want to connect with my audience, but I also want to have privacy. And so there's certain things like, I do my best to make sure that my actual address, my actual phone number is not out there. And yet, I did start the channel, and the one question I get asked a lot is your name really Josh? And yes, it is really Josh. Like I wasn't smart enough to go start everything under a pseudonym. So yes, my name's really Josh. And I think I'm okay with that. Like I know that I probably paint a little bit of a target on my back. I don't know if you feel that same way. So I have to know my risk tolerance and try not to flirt with that line too much.
Well, my industry is the offshore markets. So it has a bad reputation all around, and some of it is warranted and a lot of it is not warranted. But I made a decision, 7-8 years ago when I moved into this full time, that this is all I was going to do, was this, that I wanted to be the lighthouse. This was my idea. I wanted to shine a light on the things. I wanted to show that you can work in the offshore markets, do this type of work, and still be transparent, be legal, be compliant, go through it all properly. I use my real face and my real name. You know, I have competitors out there who use pseudonyms and fake names and things like that. And I think that when you do that, you just start off the relationship on the wrong foot with a client. So it's like, if you're not even going to share your real name or your real image or anything like that be out there, then how are you going to build that trust with them to help them go through these, often very personal, very intricate details about their life? So I wanted to be this kind of lighthouse to help them and to know that there is a trustworthy person. So everything that I do is really try to have morals and ethics at the beginning. But then, as you said, this separation between that and then like my family life, like you're a father, I'm a father, there's things that, our children, they don't get to choose these things, what they're going to put out. So my perspective is, I don't have any pictures of my kids online, any pictures of my wife and I together online. I try to keep that separate. Now, if I have a client who will come to Panama to visit me and I know the client, then I'll bring my kids along and, bring my wife and stuff like that. But I can make those decisions on an individual basis. But what do you think? How is your perspective when viewing these things?
No, I mean, I 100% agree with you on that. I think there's one thing, considering what you're putting out there that is on a platform that can be scraped, that is constantly being, the Wayback Machine, just, there's constantly just this backup of the internet that's happening. And so putting that stuff out there, whatever I put on Twitter, whatever I put on YouTube, I just have to assume that will forever be available, that information. And so when I'm thinking about these very public platforms, that's the lens through which I want to see that. And I agree with you. I don't want to put my kids' faces on anything related to my businesses, just because that's not fair to them. And I just don't think that's a good practice to do. And same with my wife as well. But, like you said as well, when it comes to when it's more intimate, when it's individuals, I do want to build that trust. I mean, it's not like I want to go in hiding. Like the whole idea of there's different levels of privacy and security, right? I've got people that do similar YouTube channels that are all about going completely off grid, like as much as you can. And if that's you, I mean, everybody has a different threat model. I don't have that threat model. My threat model says I just want to protect my privacy within a reasonable amount. I call myself a privacy pragmatist, where what is pragmatic for me to be able to accomplish, and for me that doesn't mean deleting Facebook. It doesn't mean not using an Apple phone. I still use an Apple phone, and I get as a privacy person, I get made fun of a lot of times for that. And I'm okay with that. I pick and choose. And I think you and I are probably on the same page on that. There's certain things that when it's related to my family, I'm very picky. And then when it's related to other things, I'm a little more laissez-faire.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially with a lot of the technology platforms, because I think that we also have to be very clear at the beginning, the different types of people or organizations that you're trying to be private from. I have some people who, what they're really trying to protect from is online hackers, identity theft, things like that. Then I have other people who are, or other things to consider are, you're trying to have privacy from big tech. And then other people want to have privacy from governments. I can tell you privacy from governments, especially like the US government, it's
very hard.
Very hard. And please make sure you stay legal and compliant on these things. You gotta, if you're supposed to file something, file it. Always the objective is more freedom, not less freedom. So there's privacy, but we also don't want to get orange jumpsuit situation. So, but
exactly,
these three kind of groups. I mean, I would also imagine that the strategies are kind of different. Like you had mentioned, you have an iPhone. Okay, an iPhone is going to maybe keep you very secure from online hackers, but obviously big tech, it is big tech. So how do you think about these types of things?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're thinking about just these different type of threat models, right, which is the way I would kind of view that, you're talking about people that are feeling they're more worried about just big tech or government or just hackers or online security in general. And so I think those are three different mindsets. And therefore, three different solution sets almost. So for some people, let's say if you're worried a little bit more about big tech and government, go in something like a de-Googled phone, right? So something that is an open source operating system that has zero apps that are produced by Google or Apple that are going to track you and have any of the telemetry stuff. That's one, I would say, more extreme. And I don't want to say that in a negative way, because if that's you, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. It's just recognize that extreme does not apply to everybody. It doesn't, just because my mom wants to be more secure online, I'm not going to necessarily give her a de-Googled phone, right? I'm not going to try to get her to understand how to use something that's an open source platform, an open source, anything like that. And like you were saying, so one of the things that I kind of, for me as a baseline, is I have virtual addresses, both for my personal, me personally, as well as for my business. I've got virtual phone numbers that I have control over that don't ring my actual cell phone number. But when I file my taxes, I have to put my actual address and my actual social security number. I can create as many pseudonyms as I want to use, to give to all these other places that don't necessarily need it. But yeah, I have to live by the law of the land where I have my passport. And so I've got to do that.
For sure. And for the big tech piece, I mean, we talked very quickly about Apple, but one of the villains out there is Google. Yep. Google is absolutely harvesting our data. We have no idea with it. But if your main concern is hackers, Google has pretty darn good security with a lot of that stuff, So it's like you can try one of these brand new startups that is promising the world, and their website looks very flashy and is going to protect everything that you have and all of this stuff. But it's a brand new startup with a couple $100,000 behind it, or you have Google, one of the largest corporations in the world, and their reputation is based on keeping data secure. So although I'm not a fan of Google by any means, I think that it's important to get your mindset straight on what you're trying to do, because getting hacked, that's not fun either. And if you're a business owner or something like that, you have a responsibility for data protection. If you have sensitive client data, you have to really take care of those things.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a baseline that I think everybody should be concerned about, right? Like this baseline that says, okay, do you have a strong, this is like very, very basic, strong passwords. And I would say that if you're not using a password manager, you're very likely not doing it well. And I mean, there are some people that can get by just creating their own passwords, but most of us, a password manager is kind of that's level one. And then right on top of that would be adding two-factor authentication. I think that two-factor authentication, if it's available, is something that everybody should be adding. This isn't just something for crypto enthusiasts. This is, if you have an investment account that offers two-factor security, you should be using that. And if you have the means to buy a two-factor key, something like from YubiKey, or I'm sure the Nitro Key, there's a bunch out there. That's going to be that's like the deadbolt on the lock of your front door. And then there's, other little things. I generally preach that it's good to freeze your credit. That's kind of a general kind of protection thing for those of us that are in the US, but I think that's actually now applying to Canada and Europeans as well, where these credit bureaus are popping up and having an influence in these other places as well. And you have the option to go in and freeze your credit. But then, like you're saying, that next level where if you're worried about big tech, there are other, and I'd say there are, like you said, there are good kind of startups. And then there are those that are somewhat established, right? If you want true end-to-end encryption for your email. So that's not, Gmail encrypts your email. They do, whether it's at rest or at movement, but it's not always the highest level of encryption. And it's not always encrypted. It depends on who you're sending to, right? And how they're encrypting and what happens when that email hits their inbox. So for me personally, I still have a Gmail account, but if I'm sending anything sensitive, I'm using my encrypted Proton Mail account. If I'm sending something to my CPA, that would have anything. I want to make sure that one, he's not going to have a copy just laying on his email server. If he wants to download something and keep that privately, like that's what I need him to do. But I don't want it just sitting on his email server. So I'm going to send it to him in a way that it requires him to have a password, and it requires, like, it's encrypted. And that's the protection that I want. Honestly, I think that for anybody that is of a general high net worth, so even just anything above median level income, I think that's a good practice. But it's a lot to ask some people. You've got to be motivated. And that's where, if you've got the right motivation and then you've got the means, then setting some of that stuff, it's not that hard. It takes a little bit of effort to put it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as you look at these things, we can also kind of break it. So we've already broke it down into the three categories that someone might want to be concerned about. But there's also, from the personal side and from the business side, I think it's very, very different. If you are a individual and you just want to have more privacy in your life, okay, amazing. If you're a business owner and you deal with client data or things like that, that's a whole different level, different.
Oh, yeah.
Suite of tools and things that you need to do. So let's kind of go through things. You mentioned a couple of them. Okay, 2FA and a secure email. Let's kind of go through things one by one, dig into them a little bit so that people kind of have the lay of the land. I would love this episode to be really like a resource for my clients and my subscribers to kind of go back to. And let's kind of go, all right, check mark, check mark, check mark. Because as you said, as you start going through this, you're adding to it. It's not about doing everything at the exact same time. It's not about having it, if you can't do everything, then there's no point in doing anything. It's like, no, these things stack. And actually, it's the exact same in my work. When clients come to me and we start looking at taking them offshore and making them an expat. All right, we're first looking at their residencies, then we're looking at citizenships, then we're looking at restructuring businesses offshore. Then we're looking at the banking sectors. Now we're looking at the investments. And each step that we go through on these tracks, the more freedom they have. Each one that they kind of add on to each other. So I think it is very much the same in a lot of your work. But you please correct me if I'm wrong on any of this.
No, I completely agree with you. So I think I know where I would want to start, but I want to make sure, what did you have an idea on?
No, so we went through them so fast. I think that let's go right back to the beginning and spend like 2 minutes on each one. You had said at the very beginning, you need to have 2FA, and there's a couple of things like that. Maybe kind of break down what that is, and is I don't know, getting an SMS as your 2FA, is that enough?
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. So let's back up to like the very, very beginning.
Okay.
Whenever you're logging on or creating an account for pretty much anything online, there's two pieces of main information that they're going to get from you, right? Either a username or an email address that you have to create, and then a password. And the way that most people do it is we put in our email address and then we hopefully create a unique, somewhat secure password. Now I say hopefully because I know that the majority of people, according to studies, just have a weak password. And a strong password does not mean just replacing the @ for an A and replacing, an I with an exclamation point. Like, mathematically speaking, the stronger password is not one that has a lot of different characters and everything. The stronger password is just a long one. So if you've got a phrase like, the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout, like, I know that would be a terrible password, but it's long enough that mathematically it's actually a really good password. So if you have, a poetry verse or a Bible verse, or if you've got something that is short, but still, like, in terms of characters, it's long enough, that's a strong start. Password managers make that a whole lot easier, though, honestly. And do you use a password manager, by the way? Have you ever done that?
I will not comment on things like this, but yeah.
Okay, no worries. I won't ask.
Absolutely. I probably spend about, I don't know, $10,000 a month on different security things. So,
okay, gotcha. Makes sense. So then, but what a lot of people fail to do is they fail to realize that those two pieces of information are actually equally important. So a lot of times the username, which we tend to just have as our email address, that's like key one. Like if you remember like nuclear codes, if a president has to send off nuclear, they've got to have his key, and then they got to have somebody else sticking in the other key and turning at the same time in order for it to work. And a lot of times we give up this first key and basically just throw it in the trash. But there are a lot of options for securing that part of your email as well. So I use email services that create pseudonyms basically, and you can just create them on the fly. And they're just extensions to my browser that will create a pseudonym and then track it to that. So it's just one email per service, so that if my Netflix account gets hacked for some reason, no other account, like a hacker can't take my email address and then brute force these other places, because that email address only works for Netflix. Now I would say that's like level 2. Level 1 is just, hey, have strong passwords. But if you want to go to that next level, then there are a lot of different services that offer something like that. Proton has one. I think it's called Simple Login is I think the one that they use. And then there's Anonati, and there's others like that can create these pseudonym emails on the fly. So that's kind of like what I would consider level 1 or 1.2. And then the next one that we were talking about is 2FA.
Okay,
And,
pause for a second, because I do want to
yes.
ask a couple of follow-up questions, because actually,
please.
So I do use a password manager, and I kind of set mine at, 40 characters, random generated, uppercase, lowercase, special symbols.
Yep.
Like whatever the max it will be, it's kind of goes all in on that. I don't think that there's anything bad about sharing this, but I hope not. But on these types of things, the password manager, we need to have a certain amount of trust in the password manager software itself. So anything that we should know or think about or consider, because if they have all the passwords and something happens there, well, what does that happen? What does that mean for us?
That's a great point. So there's a couple things to say to that. First is your master password for your password manager should be very good. That's kind of a no-brainer. And yet, I've seen people that just have weak passwords to enter in their password manager, and it kind of negates the whole security of having a password manager. But there's two other things I'd add to that. First is you can actually have a 2FA key for your password manager that you can use to log in. But the second side of this, and this is something that, I've called a double blind password. I think it's, other people call it salting, but for my most important accounts. So we're talking about things that I definitely don't want anybody else getting into. Even if they hacked into my password manager, if someone was that motivated, I don't want them to be able to get into my investment accounts. I don't want them to be able to get into my bank. So then what I do, what's known as salting or a double blind password. So if you were to ask me what my banking password is, I couldn't tell you. And if I opened up, if you were to open up my password manager, you wouldn't get my actual password. So what I do is when I create the password, I have my password manager create that strong password that you were talking about, and then I salt it. In other words, I add in personally and I'm not going to say how many digits, but let's say a 3 to 10 digit extra on the back end of that only I know. It doesn't get stored in the password manager, so that whenever I'm logging into some of these accounts, I have the password manager first input what's saved in the password manager, and then I type in personally what's on the back end. And so the password manager doesn't have the full password, but neither do I. And so if you don't trust your password manager, that is one way that you can do it. It would be hard to do that for all of your passwords, but for the ones that are most important.
That's super smart. That's amazing. I never thought about that one. I gotta go take care of that. Well, and I also like your tip about the specialized email address, because you're right. If there's two big pieces of information, is the username or email address to log in and the password. If we're only securing the password, that's only half the story. So to be able to use something else. Now, so you said that it's a browser extension, which will auto generate an email address for that one. And then what happens? It's just kind of a redirect to your main one in case you need to get an email from them or something, or how does that look?
Exactly. So on the back end of that, and you don't have to use the browser extension, right? So I've got one that I use for all newsletters. And it's newsletters at, I think, I've got a couple little things at simplelogin.com or IO. I don't know what it is. I should know, but I don't. And what that means though, is that on the back end, when I log into my dashboard, I can direct it to go wherever I want. And I've got one that's kind of I've got one Gmail account that's kind of my trash account that doesn't get fed into my personal account. I only check it when I absolutely need to. And so a lot of them just go straight into there unless it's something that I need to get. And I still do it for, a lot of the logins where I need to get those emails, and I just make sure they get routed to my personal address. But they never see what my real address is. Even if I were to reply to it, they wouldn't see what my real address is.
Okay. Amazing. Those are very good tips, and above and beyond normally what we kind of see in, securing online. Like it's usually use a password manager. Okay. Yeah. But actually the extra pieces to it are very interesting. Now for the 2FA, I hope everybody understands we're talking about two-factor authentication. The common ways are getting an SMS, using Google Authenticator. As you had said, like a YubiKey, I think is definitely next level. What should people know about 2FA besides the fact that you actually have to use it? Like you really need to go through this. Like I had to beat the crap out of my staff members. I got 18 staff who work for me, and to get them all to use 2FA on every one of the accounts, they're like, yeah, I'll take care of it. And then you can see it's not done. Get them, they get locked out of things and they're like, oh, what do I do now? I'm like, I told you, get it done. So, so let's get into 2FA a little bit.
Yeah. It is crazy that, we just tend to value convenience so much. And, but 2FA is one of those things that in my mind, it is a no-brainer. That's still base level. That's for, we were talking about those three categories of people. I think 2FA fits into every single one of those. I don't think that's just if you don't like big tech or just if you don't like, the government or whatnot. Like everybody should be doing 2FA. And there are three types of 2FA. I think you kind of mentioned them. You've got the SMS text, you've got authenticator apps, those 6-digit, they're called time-based one-time passcodes that refresh every 30 seconds. That can be done through an app. It can be done through software. It can be done a lot of different ways. And then you've got the 2FA key. Generally speaking, and I think that if your audience is a lot of expats, you know that using SMS text, it's already a headache. Because, I've got to now use my virtual number, and some services don't like virtual numbers. Most will accept that and they'll do that. But I tried to do something with the IRS once and they would absolutely not accept my virtual address, my virtual phone number. I had to use my mom's phone number or something like that. Which is, that's another story. It just kind of frustrates me a little bit. But if you can avoid using SMS text, and one of the primary reasons, other than convenience, for expats, is that there's something known as SIM swap. The SIM attack, where even Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, I don't know if you saw, this was a number of years ago, but it's actually happened not to him, but to other people since then, where all someone has to do is socially engineer one of these phone workers at a phone company and say, hey, I lost my phone. My name's Jack Dorsey. Okay, well, what's your mother's maiden name? Google. My mother's maiden name is Smith. Yeah. It's okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. And then they switch the phone over to, from Jack's phone to theirs. And now they do a reset on Twitter and get the code. And they have the ability to do that. And that's what's crazy is that they didn't even do that for Jack's Twitter. They actually found out that Jack was using another service to post onto Twitter, and they hijacked that service. And so oftentimes we don't even realize how intertwined our online lives are, such that somebody doesn't necessarily need to have the login to our bank. All they need is a login to this other service that we've, long time ago connected to our bank through Plaid or through some other service. And now they've got the ability to just withdraw tons of funds,
Wow. Yeah, going back through and seeing the integrations between different softwares and things that you set up, is definitely a step that I would take for anybody who's listening, to go back through and see, hey, what is connected to your email account? What is connected to your accounting software, or any of these types of things? What are the integrations, the APIs, or any of these types of bridges on there? Because maybe it was secure at the time that you got it, and maybe it is not now. And those things can stay around for a very long time. Yeah. Now, for the 2FA, okay, so we kind of tackled maybe an SMS version is not the best. And I can definitely testify that as you travel around the world, trying to get a text message in different countries, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. So I think that's always just been a real pain in the butt for expats. Now, the app, how secure are those? Because from my understanding, a lot of them can be used even if you're not online, they still work, which is, for an expat, for a convenience standpoint, this is really fantastic, because all you need to have is have the device, and then you can still get on. And if you don't have like local service or something while you're out, and I don't know, like from a convenience standpoint, it works. But how about from the security aspect?
Correct. Yeah. So what you're saying, because a time-based one-time passcode, which is that second kind of 2FA, like it's one of those things that's based on an algorithm that is multiplied by time, right? And so that's how you come up with this 6-digit passcode, and that doesn't need to be connected to the internet. It just needs to know the time based on what your phone says. So like you could, the problem would be if you were to like have your phone isn't connected well to time, like it's off on its time, then you could have problems. But from a security standpoint, it really depends on the service. And one of the things that I would recommend is don't just go out there and download any 2FA app. And there's a lot out there that are on the internet or on the app stores that you could download, whether that's the Apple or the Google Play. So, you've got things like Google Authenticator, which generally speaking, again, like most Google products, it's a good product, right? If you don't trust Google, it's a horrible product. Sure. You know what I mean? So it's like, it kind of depends. And there are changes that are happening even just this week as we're recording this, where I think Google is going to start to allow you to back up that app to your Google account, which in some ways is great because people are horrible at backing up. Which I want to get to that in just a moment, MIKKEL, because that's a big thing. But they're horrible at backing up, and so if they lose everything and they go to Google and say, "Hey, I lost my phone. Can you give me my codes back?" and Google says, "We don't have them. They're your codes. They were on your phone. We don't back them up." And that was becoming a problem. And so I think they're starting to change that. But that also means now that Google holds those keys as well. Like in my opinion, you need to be a responsible adult, and you need to be able to hold the keys to your own security. And part of that means owning those codes, right? And there's other apps like Authy where you kind of can do that. There's some people that don't like Authy as well. There are other ways, like actually and I know you're not gonna be able to see this if you're listening to the podcast, but like I use the Yubico app, and if I keep my codes actually on the key, so that when I plug into my phone, the codes show up, right? So the codes are actually kept on the key itself as opposed to on any device. So it kind of boils down to, again, like, what's your threat model? What are you trying to accomplish? Generally speaking, Google Authenticator is fine it's better than SMS text. So I'd say go for that. Next level would be like Authy, similar thing, but more than anything else, even if you're using a 2FA key, which is kind of what the gold standard for 2FA, backing up is, it's not just an option, like it is absolutely critical. I have a primary key that I keep on me, and then I have a backup key that is not on me. It is stored in another place that only my wife knows. And so if I have to, worst case scenario, she knows exactly where that is, and she's going to get it and use it there. But even beyond that, anytime you set up an account and you create that account, you set up the 2FA, almost every single service is going to give you what are either backup codes or a seed phrase, similar to like what you get with a crypto account or something, a wallet. And writing that down or putting it in a safe, keeping it, I wouldn't necessarily say in your password manager, but in a secure digital place, you could be done, but just making sure that you have that backup. Like that is, whenever we're talking about 2FA, I just feel like that's such an important part of it that I get way too many emails from people that are like, hey, I got locked out of my, crypto wallet, or I got locked out of my whatever. Can you please help me? And it's like, sorry, I can't.
Yeah. We've seen this, and, we're pretty big into crypto in my community, and lots of horror stories with this one. Actually, I have a private client. I won't say their name, just obviously for privacy reasons. But just yesterday, I was talking to them, and he's like, "Yeah, I had I think it was a Trezor or a Ledger or something like that." He's like, I've lost the seed phrase. What? And I don't know the password. How do I get back into that? I'm like, well, you can't.
I
mean, like, and then I was like, how much was on there? He's like, well, none. I'm just learning about it. And I was like, amazing. Perfect.
Good.
You've just done the greatest thing ever. You have totally screwed this up. And on the back end, there's no money in there whatsoever. So you've learned a valuable lesson. And it's not going to cost you like $100,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So I was super stoked for him. I was very happy.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I actually bought, I don't know if you've done this, but I bought like my domain as they had like unstoppable domain, like, I don't know what service, but it was like these where it can be like a crypto domain that's not owned by a certain service. And then I lost my own keys to it. So I'm never going to be able to use my own name. but thankfully I did it on something as trivial as that, as opposed to, like you're saying, something that actually had a lot of money on it.
Bitcoin buying at $5 or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. That would be bad. Okay. So kind of, we gone through some of the different levels, step 1, step 2, step 3, let's get into a couple more of the advanced things. If people are listening to this episode and they're going, come on, Mikkel, I know this stuff already. I'm pretty savvy online. What are some more advanced techniques that people should really be thinking about?
So once you get past 2FA, I really think that masking your information is one of the best things to start considering. And you can mask a lot of different information, right? You can mask everything from your phone number by, with virtual phone numbers. I mean, some of this is pretty easy and trivial, like maybe there's a lot of people that do it, but you got your address, your physical address, you can use virtual addresses for something like that. But even stuff like credit cards, like there's very few times when I'm shopping online or I'm purchasing anything online, which is a lot of what I purchase nowadays, that I'm using my actual credit card.
Okay.
Either I'm using cards that are dedicated to those specific services, or I'm using one-time use cards. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that would be like, I know Wise has this. You can generate a credit card in like 1 second with a click of a button. It'll give you a random generated one. You use it, and then what do? You just like cancel it afterwards or reject it afterwards or something like that. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, well, it depends on the service, right? So every kind of bank or banking institution like place will treat it a little differently. But I'll give you an example, right? I've got property back in the US, and I've got renters there, and I got a notice from, the city that was like, hey, you've got terribly overgrown trees, all this stuff. Like, oh crap. So get somebody to go out and do it. And it's just this mom and pop shop that are, that send me a bill for like $800. Like it was a lot of yard work. And they're like, you can just pay by credit card. Just send us the number by email. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Like that, like, I don't even know who these people are. I don't know how well they secure all their stuff.
For sure.
I mean, if these other big, online retailers can get hacked, then some mom and pop shop can definitely get hacked. So I used a service. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. I'll just name a few. Privacy.com. There's one called Clutch. There's a lot of these, Citibank, or you were mentioning Wise, that will kind of generate these. And like I said, they each operate differently. Some of them allow you to actually set up how much they are monthly spending. So I've got, one card that I've created for Netflix that can only be charged $20 a month ever. So even if someone were to steal that card, it can only be charged $20. Or in the case of this, person that did my lawn, I created a one-time use card that could only be charged for $800. And then after that, it died. Now, the card itself still lives on, because the next question that people ask is, well, what if there's a refund? Like, what if I need to get money back? The card still lives in that it can receive money back, but it can't be charged again. It gets closed in terms of being able to use. So I have cards that are for specific merchants. So I've got an Amazon card that even if someone were to hack Amazon and try to use that card, it only works for Amazon. And then I can easily cancel it. As an expat, I'm sure, I don't know, have you ever had your credit card stolen, or you've had any kind of fraud on your credit card? Is that ever?
Like, definitely I've had charges that are not supposed to be there. And sometimes I'm still fighting a couple of them right now here in Panama, which is definitely no fun.
It's no fun. And what's worse is if you have to cancel that card, like instead of waiting the week to get your card back, you have to wait for them to send it to whatever US address or whatever home address you've got. And then for that to be forwarded on to wherever you're at. So I'm out of credit card for like 3 to 4 weeks at the least.
Yeah.
And I just, like I say that because I had that happen to me just last year, and it was annoying. So being able to use these virtual credit cards and then just log in and cancel them, it makes a huge difference for me. And I've really enjoyed that as kind of an added layer of privacy for myself.
So just to make sure that I understand, so you have your normal credit card on the back end, and then on the kind of the front end, it creates these virtual cards, which all take the money from your normal MasterCard or Visa or whatever it is. And then you just keep that one private for everything. Is that how it works?
Almost.
So cool.
You can't fund, in most cases, you can't fund with a credit card. So you have to fund with either your bank account or a debit card. And that, so the people that would, the downside to this, or what people would knock against this method, is that now you're putting your trust in one company that now has access to your bank account. But I would counter that by saying, okay, well, you're putting your trust in hundreds of different organizations. I would rather know, okay, I trust Wise. And so I'm going to say, hey, they've got access to my bank. They can, withdraw funds. And I'm going to now just give virtual card numbers out to a lot of the different merchants that I'm purchasing from.
Okay. And so that would be like a SaaS program that you'd be signing up for, or it's a browser extension, or like, what are the aspects of that? Like, how does it practically work?
Yeah. So now you're getting into what's known as the KYC problem, where the know your customer. So if it is seriously just a SaaS and they're not acting as a bank, they're just acting as that middle person between, the merchant and your bank, then there's no KYC. And so like privacy.com would be an example where I can just sign up for privacy.com. They'll create these cards and, they'll use it just like that. It is a SaaS service. Where there's others like Clutch, where you are actually applying for a credit card and they are the credit provider, and then they create the virtual cards on the back end of that. And so in that case, I have to go through the entire KYC process. I've got to give them all of my data. And so it depends on what your threat model is, which direction you would go in that way.
Makes sense. I'm taking notes here myself, Josh. I'm taking notes here myself.
Awesome.
Very, very interesting. Okay. So, and you had mentioned at the very beginning on this one that, we went down the rabbit hole of credit cards, but you also said that you can be doing this with your physical address, so your home address. Maybe walk us through that aspect of the privacy, because I think that is an extremely important one that people kind of are very frivolous with giving out their home address.
Yeah, that surprises me as well. And I think it's just because there are not that many cases where it sounds like somebody's had their home invaded and it was all because they put their home address on something. So it's just not top of mind, but I still think it's really important. And I remember still, like, I was for the longest time using my parents' home address because I was living overseas, even as my business address. So, when you send out an email, at least in the US, the law requires you to put some kind of address at the bottom of that email. And my parents were starting to get like this weird stuff in the mail. And at one point, they just kind of sent me an ultimatum. They're like, Josh, you have got to move away from our address. And so that got me like, okay, well, I got to figure out something. And there are a lot of different what are known as virtual address options. So many that I got kind of worried about it. I'll have to maybe I'll send you the link to this video because it was probably one of the more fun videos that I got to do when I was back in the US one year. I just decided, hey, I got to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. Like these virtual addresses, who's picking up my mail? Like how does it look? What does it look like? And so then I just went and I did air tag in 3 different envelopes, and then I sent it to 3 different places, and then I went and visited across the country all those different places. And what you've got is and like any business, right? You've got kind of the low cost, low quality, you can have an address at one of those mom and pop mail shops in a strip center where I literally walked in and said, hey, I'm looking for mail for Josh. And they didn't even ask for my driver's license. They didn't ask for nothing. They just gave me the package. I was like, all right, thanks. Definitely not Fort Knox. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Well,
So
it's
there's that
interesting
kind of virtual
because
address.
sometimes people, their first decision maker is cost. Like I can do a service for this one for $20 a month, or that one's $200 a month. And it's like, and I don't mean just this, I mean, just in general, anything, people always, it's a race to the bottom. And it's like, it should not be a race to the bottom. Like, why is it so cheap? If that's, you can, as a business owner, you can understand how tight margins can be. So it's like, maybe you want to pay more. Maybe with that money, they're going to be able to provide a better service, be more secure. There's a lot of extra things, even hire more competent people on the back end. So maybe a race to the bottom, not a good idea. This is not Walmart. So.
Oh, exactly. And then one of the virtual addresses, the one that I still use now today because of this experience, like it was a business center, it was unmarked and it was all locked and like shaded window door. Like I couldn't even like go and peek in to see what was happening. And thankfully I, contacted them beforehand. And so they gave me a tour of the inside. They got security cameras everywhere. In order to pick it up, you've got to provide, your driver's license or passport or something like that. And so you can have different kinds of virtual addresses where if the security of your mail is of utmost importance to you, then having something that maybe costs a little bit more, and it's not even the difference between $20 and $200. It's the difference between $20 and like $50. Wow. So it really doesn't even make sense why you wouldn't want to just pay a little bit more. But for me, especially out here as a business owner in Thailand, like I want to be able to get my mail. They scan it for me if I ask them to, and then I can have them forward it anywhere, or I can have them shred it and they have it, professionally disposed of. And it just gives me a lot of confidence in my mail. And it also gives me the convenience of, not having that forwarded all around the world if it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. No, it absolutely makes sense. A lot of the times people think about like hiding their address is just to make sure they don't get doxxed or something like that. I think that, that is very important, but there's all the way little things like your mail as well that you need to protect. But I think that there's kind of everything in between as well. Making sure that you secure where you live so that people can't just, I don't know, come and knock on your door one day. And especially as a content creator like you and I both am, I can't just have my personal address out there. And actually I get recognized on the streets here in Panama. Really? I was hiking on the weekend with my daughter and someone came up to me. I've been out with my family on the streets and people have recognized me and things like that. And it's like, wow, that's just walking around or being out for dinner or something. But if I had my home address, I don't know, it'd be a bit weird. I think so.
Well, and I think when we talk about it like that, like we're talking about it in a very benign way, but most of the time, if somebody's looking for your home address, it's because you've ticked them off, right?
Sure.
And that's the worst kind of person that you want to be able to find, so, and in the positions that we're in, and honestly, sometimes if you're in business, you're going to tick somebody off. Like somebody's just not going to be happy with something you say. And I don't want to make it easy for them to try to act on their anger. You know what I mean?
Sure. Well, I think that you would get it in a different way that I get it. This is my suspicion. My guess would be, hey, Josh runs the All Things Secured YouTube channel. Therefore, I'm going to try to make Josh look like an asshole and I'm going to hack him just for shits and giggles,
Yes.
So that would probably that's my guess is how you would get it. Mine, on the other hand, is I am a very outspoken freedom fighting type of person. And with that, I often offend a lot of people. Now, the people who think the same as I do, they're not offended about it. They agree with me on these types of things. But somehow I get random Marxists who kind of wander onto my email newsletter, and then they're like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And, send me hate mail. I have literally gotten death threats before.
Man.
I'm going to fly to Panama. I'm going to come and get you. I'm going to
Wow.
Well, you challenge people's belief patterns on what they think is real. And it's a highly emotionally charged thing. If think about it, if someone has spent their entire life thinking one thing, and now you call them on it and you challenge them about it, like most people are not personally responsible enough to kind of look at it and go, all right, is there credibility to what he's saying, or is he just being a jerk? It's much easier just to go, like, he's wrong, point the finger, and, just hate on someone. So I have literally gotten death threats before. And when that started happening, I took this stuff a lot more seriously. Like,
I bet.
I carry a handgun here in Panama. So, I'm a father, I'm a husband. I got responsibility, and I'm not going to stop saying the things that I think that need to be said. But at the same time, I will take a lot of the privacy that we're talking about today seriously. And I have a SIG with me at all times, and I'm very happy to carry. So legally, compliantly.
Yeah. And for those of us that are expats living overseas, this isn't as much of an issue, but I think most people would be surprised if they were to Google their name and like even their hometown or the town that they're living in. These places like People Search or White Pages or what are known as data scrapers, they gather a lot of information about us. And sometimes it's scary to just think about how easy it would be for somebody to find a phone number or an address, or just, who you're connected to, what's your mother's name, and therefore what's her maiden name, those type of pieces of information. And so now there's a new, group of or series of companies that work to help remove all of that information from the internet. And that's, something for those that are really trying to remove their online presence that is worth considering as well.
No, that makes sense. Absolutely. Well, any other big tips or other things that people should consider when trying to secure everything online? We went through some really good things, but any other ones that you can think of that, like, oh, the listener, they got to know about this one. I forgot to tell them about that one.
The only thing I'd say, and this this can be easy for pretty much anybody that's listening to this podcast, I believe, is that when you're asked for a form of ID, I always tell people to use your passport. Like if you're requesting for an official, like you have to give this in, right? So not just giving it to anybody willy-nilly, but as opposed to like my driver's license. So think about it. What's the information that's on my passport? What's on my passport is my name, my birthday, and maybe my city of birth. Whereas on my driver's license, you've got my name, my birthday, my address, my blood type, my eye color. Like you've got all of these other pieces of information. And it's not that much, but it's like as often as I can, I want to give over as little as I can. And so whenever I'm asked for an official documentation and I'm given the choice between a passport and a driver's license, I'm always going to go for a passport. And then I'm going to challenge anytime they request more information than I think they need. A lot of times I think that these accounts, they request more than they need.
That's super interesting because my instinct would have told me the exact opposite. But as you explain it, it definitely makes sense. But I always think of like the highest level of document is your passport. This is the intergovernment relationship where you're able to enter a country because of this diplomatic thing. So like that seems like a very high level. A driver's license is your permission to drive on the roads. The passport is your permission to travel between countries, So I always kind of thought about it that way, where I've always hid my passport and kind of refused to give that out. But actually on your example of the information that's presented on the front page of the passport is very different than, a driver's license, as you had said, your height, your weight, your address, which goes back to our previous conversation.
Well, and now that I think about it, like I'm remembering kind of a little bit more of your audience and stuff. Like I can see like if what you're worried about more than anything else is just that government piece, then I can see that maybe passport wouldn't be what you'd go for. But in terms of information that's provided, a passport is definitely ideal over a driver's license if you have to give something over.
Well, I remember when I first started traveling internationally in 2000, when you would go to a hotel, they were never asking for ID, never, ever,
Mm,
ever, and certainly not a passport. And then
yeah.
kind of over the years, it became standard practice to ask for a passport. And I started getting in fights with, receptionists and stuff like that. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is a Canadian passport to enter a country. You are a hotel. What what possible need would you have for my passport? Like I'm already in the country. This has to do with immigration. It's a totally different thing. And I argued it for a while and made them understand and got away with it. But piece by piece, now it's mandatory. Now anywhere and
Yeah.
everywhere you go, you have to give your passport over when you're coming into a hotel. And it just seemed like a complete violation of my privacy. Like
Mhm.
I don't know, it just seems like kind of a sacred document to me.
No, I mean, I agree with you there in terms of I have always been, and I had the same experience when I was in China because China's implemented the same rules where, and essentially what they're trying to do is they're registering your presence with the local authorities, right? So they're taking a copy. Maybe they don't do this in every country, but I know that in Thailand and in China, this is what they do, and they register your presence. And so, I would sometimes in China, I would get a knock on my door at midnight, the police just making sure that I was actually in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like I think it's different if you're a tourist, in my opinion. Like if you're a tourist, I honestly don't care, how they treat you. But if I've been given a visa to live in this country, if I've been given the right to move about freely, then I'm with you. I think it's kind of ridiculous that I'm having to give over a passport, but yeah, try to fight that. That nowadays that's pretty
Exactly.
hard.
Well, when I really saw the big difference was when I was living in the Middle East. Now, I lived in
Mm,
Abu Dhabi for 8 years, and in the UAE, which is a gorgeous country, and I really, really love, and it holds such a special place in my heart. There are some rules that I don't agree with, and one of them is that if you stay in a room, if you're not married to that person of the opposite sex, it's against the law,
mm,
and you can actually go to prison for it. So to
really?
go into a hotel with a girlfriend, for example,
Yeah.
and now you're giving over your passport and it's against the law. And like, that was just a little bit worrying. So,
Yeah.
just kind of things to consider like that. I'm a happily married man now, so it doesn't matter. But,
Yeah.
back in 2011 when I got over to the UAE, it was a different situation. So,
Yeah.
I mean, having to understand the local laws and what are the repercussions of even things like this, where as an American or a Canadian, like that probably would not even occur to somebody. You have a partner, um, and now you want to go stay in a hotel, and that could actually jeopardize your freedom. Like that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and Mikhail, continuing on with what we were saying before, a couple other little extra things that I'd say is if you're a Google user, like if you do enjoy using Google and you want to continue, there's something known as the Advanced Protection Program that you can apply to. It's not that much. It really just forces 2FA, and then it grants a little bit of extra protection on the back end of your accounts. And then on the similar side for Apple side of stuff, they've got an advanced data protection thing that you can easily set up on your devices that just it adds that extra layer of protection if you feel like you need it. And so both of those, if that's something that somebody who's listening to this or watching this that wants to just have that little bit of extra, those are both things that are worthwhile.
Amazing. Well, so many good tidbits in here, so many things to keep in mind. Josh, I love it. I think it's just absolutely brilliant. Now, if my listeners want to find out more about what you do, if they want to get a hold of you or watch the channel, where can we send them?
Well, I've got the YouTube channel, which is just All Things Secured. You can search for that, or it's at All Things Secured. And then I'm fairly active on Twitter. So my handle's all_secured. Or again, you can just search for All Things Secured, and I'll do my best to reply to anything there. But yeah.
Amazing. Brilliant. Josh, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I will talk to you soon. Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it as well.